us money.
You've said before that Iran looked ready for this confrontation and had been preparing for a full-scale war well in advance. So what convinced you of that?
Yeah, so my understanding was that early in the morning, the Iranians were going to strike in the early hours of the morning. I'm not quite sure about the exact time, but it was supposed to happen very soon. Now, as I said, my expectation and the expectation of many was that war would happen, but Iran was prepared for it. There are a number of issues. One is a moral issue, obviously, which is first and foremost. But also, it's obvious that if Iran allows the United States to violate a ceasefire, to violate an agreement at any level, that agreement is not going to work. So after the 39 days of fighting, when the US and the Israeli regime launched their blitzkrieg attack and their murderous war and slaughtered the kids in the school and all that, after 39 days when it ended and we had a ceasefire and there was a ceasefire agreement, and immediately Netanyahu back then began to carpet bomb Beirut, Iran discontinued its implementation. Iran was going to allow those extra ships from the countries that helped the United States in the Persian Gulf to leave through the Strait, and Iran stopped it. Why? Moral issues are, of course, paramount for us. With the axis of resistance, this whole axis was made to support the people of Palestine against ethno-supremacism. But also, if you allow the Trump regime or any US regime or any Western regime to violate a part of the agreement, they will move on to the next part of the agreement. Because once you say, okay, well, that's okay, we'll exclude that, but implement the rest, that's not what they're going to do. They'll say, well, we got this, let's do the next one. So when it comes to these monsters, when it comes to this, the Epstein class, you have to be tough. You have to be steadfast and say, no, you cross this red line, we're done. And that was the mistake that Iran made during the nuclear deal, the JCPOA. We negotiated in good faith. We implemented our side of the bargain, but the deal was designed in a way in which the Americans, its implementation of the deal was basically left to their, they would decide if they would do so or not. We counted on their goodwill. That was extremely naive because the United States didn't show goodwill. So the Iranians implemented their side of the bargain, and some of what they did was irreversible, at least for the short or medium term. And then the United States under Obama refrained from doing so. So now the Iranians are saying, A, every element of the deal has to be implemented, and B, the other side has to implement first. Whenever we come to the conclusion that they are carrying out their obligations, then we will move to the next stage. That is why the Iranians, when it's in the current negotiations, they say the money has to be transferred to Iran. So why? It's not because Iran needs it now instead of 2 weeks from now, because the Iranians know that if the deal is implemented, the Americans won't do it. And 2 weeks will become 2 months, and it will become and nothing will happen, just like with the JCPOA. So with Lebanon, the moral issue is paramount, but also the Iranians know that if they let the Americans and the Israelis get away with these violations, then the whole deal will come crashing down on the heads of Iranians. Another thing that I have to point out is, and sorry for this very long talk, but there are a few things that I should point out. Another thing that people don't recognize is that throughout the Iranians have been saying there must be a ceasefire across the region. That includes Gaza. Gaza is not named, nor is the West Bank, nor is Yemen, nor is Iraq, because they're all a part of the region. Lebanon is named because of the genocidal attacks on Lebanon. The targeting of the Lebanese people right now is like how Gaza was being hit last year. But it includes Gaza. That has to be a part of the ceasefire. Now, Gaza is complicated because U.S. allies in the region helped Trump impose a very bad agreement on Gaza. You remember when Trump went to Egypt and all these regional leaders, Sisi and Erdogan and Aliyev and Abdullah and and Jordan and others from the Persian Gulf, and they all went there and they whitewashed his crimes, they praised him, and they basically gave a stamp of approval on the ceasefire in Gaza. Iran was not a part of that process. But Iran would never stand against any decision made by Hamas. So there is already a ceasefire in Gaza. And so Iran's room for maneuvering Gaza is not all that great. Right? So if Hezbollah, let's say, had agreed that, let's say, the Israeli regime was to take this area permanently or whatever, or for the time being, or that would limit Iran's abilities. So, and of course, Hezbollah would never do that, but Hamas was under immense pressure. And these countries were helping the United States. Now, they can pretend otherwise, and I have friends who still argue with me from Turkey, and understandably, they want to believe that their government is helping the Palestinians, but no, their government is helping Israel. At a time when we have fuel shortages across the world, Aliyev in Azerbaijan, a Shia country, an ally of the Israeli regime, is transporting oil to help Netanyahu through Turkey. So Aliyev and Erdogan are facilitating Netanyahu's government and the genocide in Gaza and Lebanon, the West Bank, and all that. So anyway, Gaza is included. Gaza was never excluded, but because of that agreement, which had the support of these regional regimes, it is difficult for Iran to push too far because there is already an agreement that everyone agreed. They'll say, if the Hamas agreed to it, everyone else agreed to it, now you're trying to change. So Iran wants to make sure that that agreement is enforced, because since the ceasefire, almost 950 Palestinians have been murdered. And you're not seeing this in the media, the Western media. You only see it online from activists, because the Western media doesn't want us to know this, just like they don't want people to know that the Israelis are flattening towns and cities across Lebanon.
You pointed to yesterday's message from Washington to Hezbollah, essentially telling them to stop attacks or face wider escalation, even as their territory remains under pressure. And then we saw Iran step in and shift the dynamic. Do you think this signals a broader shift in how the so-called axis of resistance will respond going forward?
Well, Iran doesn't want it for Gaza or for Lebanon equally. But again, the regional regimes, in my opinion, treacherously assisted Trump in imposing a ceasefire on Gaza, which is not a ceasefire. And right now we see that the Israeli regime is not only murdering people, but they're taking more territory, and they want to even go further. They're even now Netanyahu wants to push for 70% of Gaza. All of this is a violation, but you're not going to see it in the New York Times or the Guardian or the Washington Post or anywhere like that. So Iran's options in Gaza are more limited. Just finding a way to stop the slaughter of children, women and children, and the innocent. They're all innocent, but you get what I'm saying. And then in Lebanon, the Iranians are saying that the Israeli regime must leave Lebanon. And we must go to a point where the Israeli regime is not occupying any part of Lebanon, and the Israeli regime cannot carry out operations inside Lebanon and start assassinating people again. That's not acceptable. With regards to reconstructing Lebanon, Iran have no doubt, Nima. Through reparations, the Iranian will take that money and they will help rebuild every building in southern Lebanon, even though the Lebanese government doesn't want this. The Lebanese government is preventing Iran from sending aid to help people, the refugees. The Lebanese government is utterly sinister, utterly evil. They're helping the Americans in these regimes, these Arab dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, to corner the resistance supporters. They're a part of this, and they're blocking any aid from coming in from Iran or Iraq. They want to crush the people of the resistance. They're the enemies of Lebanese sovereignty. And they are also trying to push for a ceasefire where the Israelis are still in Lebanon. But Hezbollah will not accept. Lebanon's sovereignty has to be restored. The Israeli regime must leave. And the Iranians, through the reparations that they get, they will rebuild both Iran and all of those areas destroyed in Lebanon. Every single building, every single home will be rebuilt.
You mentioned the Lebanese government presenting its talks with Washington as progress, while at the same time Trump is claiming that negotiations with Iran are going well, and even suggesting contact with Hezbollah. What do you make of these mixed signals? And what do they tell us about the real state of US-Iran talks?
Of course, he wasn't speaking with anyone in Hezbollah. But I mean, that's Trump. Well, no one should take anything that he says seriously. The Iranians stopped the negotiations. Why? Because that would be added pressure. Again, going back to what I said earlier, Iran does not want the global economy to crash. Whoever thinks that is wrong, even if they support it, because a lot of people want Iran to crash the global economy, and they're willing to make the personal sacrifices so that the resistance would be able to defeat it. I understand that, but it's not the right path, because the crashing of the global economy will create starvation, it'll create global misery. Iran does not want that. So Iran declared yesterday that the talks have stopped. Now that Trump has made that statement, basically forcing the Israelis to stop, and of course no one trusts Trump and no one trusts the Israeli regime. We may, after this show, hear that the Israelis are bombing Dahia. And if they do, then Iran will strike Israel swiftly. So we don't know, but at this point, the position now is that Trump will not allow Netanyahu to strike civilian targets in Beirut. So I would assume that the messaging going back and forth will continue again. Because after all, the Americans took that, they took that. I don't know the details. I have not spoken to anyone, but I'm imagining that since this has happened, that the messaging will go back and forth. Because remember, some believe that an agreement is impossible. I don't discount that at all. Some believe that it is possible. I don't know. But if Iran can get a good deal for Gaza, for Lebanon, for the region, for Iran, then they should pursue it. But it should be a deal. It can only be a deal where the other side carries out its obligations first, and then the Iranians would reciprocate. And of course, the Iranians have one important tool in their toolbox, and that is the Strait of Hormuz. So what Iran wants is an end to the genocide. It's not really asking for much, or let's say demanding much. Iran says, end the genocide. And the West says, no, we'll let them continue with the genocide. And why don't we just do a deal with you? No, end the genocide, end the siege, hand over Iran's assets. The Strait of Hormuz is Iranian and Omani territorial water. And we will get our reparations through our territorial water that is being used. If you don't like it, you shouldn't have started the war. And in addition to that, Iran will not allow the Persian Gulf to ever again be used as a military base to carry out attacks on Iran or Yemen, as they did before. All these regimes helped the Saudis and the Americans in Yemen, all of them. Qatar too. Only later on, when Qatar and Turkey, when under siege, then Qatar and Turkey split from the Saudis and the Emiratis in their genocidal attack on Qatar, on Yemen. But the American war on Yemen was also carried out with the help of these regimes, and Qatar and their base, the CENTCOM, and so on. In Syria, in Iraq, the invasion of Iraq. The only country in the region to oppose the invasion of Iraq was Iran. And Iran, of course, when the US went in, Iran began its infiltration, just like in Afghanistan. But in any case, Iran is not going to allow the Persian Gulf to be a military zone for the Americans to use against countries across the region anymore. These are not crazy demands. But for the empire, what would be sane to all of us is just insane to them. Now, how could anyone demand justice? We give what we want, we take what we want.
You're arguing that we may be seeing a new shape of West Asia emerging, where instead of relying on formal guarantees, like during the JCPOA, the focus shifts to practical leverage over key choke points, such as the Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb, with regional actors positioning these as enforcement tools in any broader understanding with the United States. How do you interpret this shift in terms of future negotiations and stability?
Yeah, exactly. As we discussed earlier, the Iranians and their allies in the Axis, they have not gone very far up the escalation ladder for humanitarian reasons. I mean, remember, and if we have war, though, this time around, it'll be, as I said, it'll escalate very fast based on what the Zionists and the Americans are saying, destroying all of Iran's critical infrastructure. And so Iran doesn't want that to happen. Just like, so, for example, when I've warned people in these regimes, in Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait, to leave when these threats were being made, or when we're on the verge of we seem to be on the verge of war, is because I don't want people to get killed. But if they destroy Iran's critical infrastructure from using these regimes, using these countries, then Iran will retaliate. Why did Iran strike Qatar's gas installations? Because our gas installations were targeted. It's deterrence. If Iran doesn't do it, they'll destroy everything. They won't relent. They have no humanity, the Epstein class. They have zero humanity. They started the war with murdering 168 little girls, and the Western media was indifferent about it. Human rights organizations, they're all funded by the Epstein class. All of these where do you think the Western human rights organizations get their money? Where do you think these feminist organizations, all these NGOs, where do they get their money? Did they get it from like workers and working in factories in Ohio, or farmers in in Northern Europe? Of course not. They get them from these powerful NGOs. They're all wittingly or otherwise, unwittingly working I don't want to say they're all agents, but in general, they're working in the interests, their organizations work for the interests of the empire. So Iran does not want, so this time around, if there is war, there will be swift, and look at what happened. They murdered almost 3,500 Iranians. How many Arabs and workers in the Persian Gulf died in this war? Not even 20. Why? Because Iran was careful not to kill civilians, even though these countries were deeply involved. And so my warnings were also basically to say, get out of there. If there's war and the infrastructure is destroyed, the oil and gas facilities, the electricity, and all that, it'll be unlivable. So leave, so you don't get hurt. No one here wants people to get hurt. We don't want the war. So Iran did not go up the escalation ladder. But next time, based on Trump's own threats to wipe out a civilization, again, no one protests in the West about this. No, I'm not talking about ordinary people. I'm talking about the media, the NGOs, the ruling class. Wipe out Iran's civilization, obliterate Iran, send Iran back to the Stone Age. Based on those threats, next time around, the move up the escalation ladder will be very swift. What does that mean? That will mean no more oil and gas from our region, of course. Right now, you know that 25 to 30 ships go through the Strait of Hormuz every day. Countries that are friendly to Iran, or at least didn't take part in the war against Iran, they can use the strait. Bab al-Mandab will be closed. Iraq, the resistance will rise up. It'll be a completely different situation. It will be catastrophic for the world. And we can do it now. But we do not want the global economy to be wrecked. We want an end to the genocide in West Asia. And we want life to go on for ordinary people across the globe and the region as normal.
You're pointing to growing European pressure on Iran over the Strait of Hormuz, while also highlighting the long-running impact of sanctions that have affected even humanitarian and medical access, despite official claims that such areas are exempt. How do you see this tension shaping Iran's current stance toward Europe and future negotiations?
First of all, they're lying. They do include all of these in the sanctions. They use, for example, Iran wants to buy equipment for hospitals, and they call a lot of that equipment dual use, just to prevent it from being exported to Iran. And then they prevent medicines from getting in. Many pharmaceutical companies, they tell the Iranians, we just can't work with you. And because they want to be on the safe side. And then others, when Iran can't, if they say they are willing to cooperate, Iran approaches banks, and the banks say, we can't help you. And the Iranians say, well, these aren't sanctioned. And they say, well, so the Americans the Europeans and the Americans have designed it in a way to make sure nothing works. But they can pretend to say, no, we're excluding medicine. They're lying. They're trying to block medicine from entering Iran. They're trying. That's just like they murdered the kids. But look at Gaza. After Gaza, should anyone be surprised? After what's happening right now in Lebanon, they're slaughtering kids every day. Why should anyone be surprised? But it's not just that, Nima. During the 12-day war, these European countries supported the war. During this war, they supported the war. They condemned Iran for aggression against Iran. It's like this dystopian world. That's why I say that they're at the bottom of humanity. I prefer the North Korean government, whatever it may be, to any of these governments in Europe and North, any of them, every single one. Australia, New Zealand, this club, Canada. I prefer any government to theirs. I prefer Cuba. I'd rather live in Cuba than I'd rather go and give taxes to these regimes. I mean, I know lots of people oppose them, and they're working activists, and I'm not criticizing them. I'm just saying that me as an individual, if I want to leave Iran, I don't want to live in those countries. I mean, their regimes are utterly sinister. There are many heroes: Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, working to support the Palestinian cause, and majority in the West polls show that they're opposed to the regimes and the Epstein class. But these regimes are horrible. They're evil. And so NATO countries and European countries, they are a part of this aggression against Iran. They've been a part of it from the beginning, and they're a part of it now. But Iran is not intimidated by them. They have more than enough on their plate now in Ukraine, and they're just destroying their own economies. Their economies are all being destroyed, and I think many of these governments are going to be removed from power. Look at the approval ratings of the Chancellor of Germany, or the President of France, or the Prime Minister of the UK, and even the opposition, even those the fascists who want to come to power. In many cases, they're not going to do any better. They can't reverse this trend because they're not going to pursue sane policies either. It's just going to get worse and worse until there are sane people in power in these countries who bring about change. That will hopefully happen at some point, but it's not happening now.